On a recent episode of STV, Rich and I took out a pair of Polaris Matrix sleds, one 650 and one 850, to get a real-world handle on how these sleds compared to one another. Now, it's obvious that the 850 is going to be faster than the 650, which it is, hands down. But the question is, by how much? So to answer that, we took both of the sleds out to the ice and ran them on the radar gun. But before we get to that part of the story, I want to take a minute and look back at how these two sleds compared to one another on the trails. To begin with, we rode 340 kilometers in all types of conditions and from day into night, which gave us a pretty good idea how these sleds compare to one another, but also what the new Matrix chassis is like on the trails. We rode each of these sleds last spring back at Snowshoot, and as great as that event is, our ride time on the new units is somewhat limited, and it's easy to miss quirks and details of the machine. You know, the ones you only find out after a really big long ride day? So with 340 kilometers of trail underneath the skis now, some of the details we learned at Snowshoot were confirmed, but we also found out a couple more as well. On each Matrix chassis, both Rich and I were very impressed with the wind protection for the rider. This was a definite goal for Polaris when they designed the new bodywork, and there's no question that they succeeded. I was even able to ride for a few minutes without any gloves on. I could really feel the dead air behind the windshield, and at 50 kilometers an hour, I could feel very little air over my hands on the bars either. In addition, the 850 had the VR1 package, which is a real handy device to have on the trail system. This technology isn't new for Polaris, but as we get better at operating the technology, the better it integrates into the ride experience, and it's definitely worth the investment compared to the Launch Edition 650 we had. But if you do decide to go with the VR1 package and the 7S display, do yourself a favor and really learn all the functionality the system has. You won't be disappointed. The VR1 option also gets you temperature-controlled hand grips. Now, this is technology exclusive to Polaris, and basically it works by allowing you to set them to the temperature you want, and the hand grips will stay there all day long. And it's another great reason to order the VR1 package over the Launch Edition. Now, one thing I didn't like about either one of these sleds when it comes to the handlebars is the high-low beam headlight switch. The new slick switchgear on the left side handlebar integrates the high beam switch into the block instead of being a separate switch like on the old models. This makes it a little hard to find with gloved thumbs when you want to switch quickly from high to low or back again. Now, this is a super nitpicky detail and one that you might get used to over time, but for me, I think I really like the design of the old chunky switch better, the one that was blue and underneath the handlebar itself. Now, this is one detail that we did miss at Snowshoot because there we only ride during the daylight. Just shows you that there's no replacement for saddle time. And speaking of saddle, over the 340 kilometer ride, Rich felt more at home in the new, narrower saddle than I did. I did like the narrowness in the transition area from the seat to the tank, but didn't really like the way my shins fit up against the side pods. It put my busted up old knees in an awkward position where on the old Axis chassis, I had a more square-on side pod to hold my shins and knees into. Now, these issues are my own, and for a lot of you, probably non-issues. Now, at the end of the day, details aside, the new Matrix chassis in either the V1R or the Launch Edition is a step ahead of the Axis in every way, which is exactly what Polaris was going for. For me, I can't wait to throw down another 340 kilometer day on either one of these sleds. So with the chassis stuff out of the way, it's time to talk about power, baby. On the trails, both of these sleds will smash any speed limit within seconds of pulling the trigger, but each engine is a completely different ride experience. So let's get this one thing out of the way right now. There is no way the 650 is going to keep up with the 850. Whether it's from a dead stop or a roll-on, the 850 walks and then runs away from the 650. I mean, there is no reality where the 650 has a hope against the 850. On the trail, this translates into a ride experience where the 650 is actually a bit more friendly. It's still fast, but because it doesn't hit as hard as the 850 anywhere in the power band, the smaller engine seems to flow better without the violence the 850 brings to the party. The 650 is also smoother, with almost no vibration into the handlebars at trail speeds, and it always consumed a little less fuel at each gas stop. This engine is still very sporty, and all but the most performance-oriented hardcore rider will be extremely happy with it. The 850 is the Mr. Hyde compared to the 650's Dr. Jekyll. Now, this sled will build speed out of the corner blisteringly fast and will do it with horror film type attitude. Now, I'm not saying this is a sled that wants to hurt you as a rider. I'm just saying that this Mr. Hyde, it's not a character that's going to fit in a Hugh Grant movie. The 850 will pull the skis off the ground, and it will spin the track, and it will test your skills as a rider. All good stuff in my opinion, but it's a combination that demands respect when ridden and isn't for amateurs. Now, we didn't go full hooligan on the trail to test out the all-out performance differences between these two engines. Instead, we went to Kevlar Lake to stretch the belts on the ice, where we were free from the constraints of speed limits, and the radar gun backed up our performance predictions. But the numbers we got shouldn't be quoted as the absolute speed numbers for either one of these machines. They were what the radar gun told us, but it only represents a moment in time when we were testing on the ice given the conditions. If the conditions were faster, I'm sure the speeds would have also been faster, but the difference in speed between the 650 and 850 would have still been there. We started on the ice track where each sled struggled with traction off the line and for most of the run despite the sleds being equipped with ice ripper tracks. Limited by traction, the two sleds left pretty close to one another, which was the closest the 650 ever came to keeping up with the 850. After about 100 meters though, the 850 was gone. We also ran the sleds individually on the radar run where the lack of traction was still an issue, but the 850 pulled an impressive 93 miles an hour and the 650 topped out at 86 miles an hour. And just to get in front of the comments, we also ran the sleds again individually on the ice where we had a packed down track to run on, and the results were 95 miles an hour for the 850 and 82 for the 650, which was a little bit slower. Overall, not too bad, but even in the runs we did off camera, the 850 dominated the 650 every time. It was never even close. Both these sleds would probably go faster depending on conditions, but each sled was completely stocked the way we took delivery, and you shouldn't quote these numbers as absolute. It's just what we achieved on this day. But regardless of the top speeds, there's absolutely no way the 650 is ever going to run down an 850. But really, how relevant are those top speeds? At the end of the day, both of these engines are excellent pieces of engineering that will satisfy anybody's reasonable expectation of performance. Now, I'm not going to call out one engine being better than the other because they're just too different. These things are like apples and oranges. Instead, I'm going to wrap up the comparison like this, and I'm going to say it doesn't matter which engine you put in the Matrix chassis, you are going to be happy with the performance. All you got to do is figure out if you want the ultimate in performance, you need an 850. If you want great performance, but just don't have to be the first one across the lake each time, then the 650 might be the one. You know, it's funny, I could have simplified that last 5-8 minutes of TV by showing absolutely nothing and then just saying there's no replacement for displacement.